Welcome, sleepwalkers. I am your storyteller tonight, here to help you drift into deep, peaceful sleep. Before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more bedtime stories. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I never believed in family curses. People in our town whispered that the Monroe bloodline carried bad luck, that every generation lost something. A child, a parent, a mind. I used to laugh it off. My father said those were just small-town stories meant to keep people entertained during long winters. But when he died last month, and I found myself driving alone down the winding road to Coldwater Hollow, our family's isolated estate in rural Pennsylvania, those stories didn't seem so funny anymore. The house was waiting for me, and it felt alive. I hadn't seen it in nearly 20 years. Not since my mother disappeared one November night when I was 14. The police called it a runaway case. My father said she couldn't handle the isolation, but something in his voice, that strained mix of fear and guilt, told me there was more. Now it was just me, the last Monroe, returning to a home that had swallowed everyone before me. The drive took longer than I remembered. The trees on either side of the gravel road seemed to close in tighter, like ribs wrapping around a heart. The house finally appeared through the mist. Tall, gray, its once white walls stained with moss. It looked exactly as it had in my childhood nightmares. When I stepped inside, the air felt heavy. Dust motes swirled in the weak light, bleeding through the curtains. The scent of mildew and damp wood hit me like a wave. I called out, "Hello?" though I wasn't sure who I expected to answer. The silence was thick, unbroken except for the slow groan of floorboards beneath my boots. Her smile looked forced. My own face, small and wide-eyed, seemed caught between them like a secret neither wanted to tell. I turned away. The first night was restless. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was listening. Every time the wind brushed the walls, I swore I heard whispers buried beneath it, voices too soft to make out. At around midnight, I woke to a faint rhythmic sound. Tap, tap, tap. It came from somewhere below me, the cellar. My stomach tightened. I hadn't been down there since I was a kid. My father used to lock it, saying it was unsafe. But after he died, the lawyer mailed me the key with a note that simply said, "Don't stay past the second night." That was it. No explanation. I tried to laugh it off, but even then, I think I knew what he meant. The next morning, I explored the house. The kitchen ceiling had collapsed in one corner. The wallpaper peeled like skin. But the cellar door still looked solid, old oak, heavy, and sealed with a new lock. I hesitated only a moment before unlocking it. The door groaned open, breathing out a gust of cold, damp air. I flicked on my phone's flashlight and started down the steps. Cobwebs brushed my face. The smell was unbearable, a mix of rust, mold, and something sour. At the bottom, I found shelves of old tools, jars of nails, and wooden crates. But the far wall caught my attention immediately. It looked newer. The boards didn't match the rest of the cellar, and they were nailed unevenly, as if someone had slapped them up in a hurry. I stepped closer. When I pressed my palm against the wood, it was freezing. My father had been a carpenter. He would never have done a job that sloppy. I tried not to think about it as I went back upstairs, but the image of that wall wouldn't leave my mind. That night, I dreamt of my mother. She stood at the foot of my bed, her hair wet, her dress clinging to her skin. She was whispering something I couldn't understand. Then she raised her hand and pointed toward the floor. When I woke, my room was freezing, and the cellar door was open. The third day, I called my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister. She'd stopped visiting the house long before my mom disappeared. When she answered, her voice trembled. "You went back there?" she asked. "I had to. I'm cleaning it out for the estate." "Eli," she said quietly, "you need to leave. Don't stay another night." I tried to get her to explain, but she just said, "Your father lied about your mother, and about his father. You don't know what that place really is." Then she hung up. The line went dead, leaving only the faint hiss of static. I stared at the phone in my hand until I realized the tapping had started again. Only this time, it was louder, coming from the cellar. I grabbed the crowbar from the hallway and went downstairs. My flashlight shook in my hand. The tapping stopped when I reached the bottom. The new boards on the wall seemed to vibrate faintly, as though something was behind them. I pressed my ear against the wood, and I heard it. A voice, soft, muffled, and pleading. "Help me." My heart nearly stopped. "Mom?" I whispered. The voice came again, weaker. "Please, help me." The rational part of me screamed that it wasn't possible. She'd been gone for 19 years. But the part of me that had spent those 19 years wondering what if couldn't ignore it. I pried off the first board, then another. Nails screeched as they came loose. The smell that spilled out was foul, wet earth, decay, and something faintly chemical. Behind the boards was a small tunnel, barely tall enough to crawl through. The dirt walls were lined with wood beams. I crawled in. The tunnel stretched maybe 20 feet before opening into a small chamber. My flashlight beam danced across the walls, and my breath caught in my throat. There were bones. Not scattered, but neatly arranged, stacked in rows like some kind of macabre archive. Human bones. And in the center of the room sat an old wooden chair. On it rested a small metal box. I stepped closer, my legs trembling. Inside the box was a collection of old photographs. Black and white portraits of people I didn't recognize. Each had a name written in faded ink on the back. Samuel Monroe, 1889. Clara Monroe, 1913. Thomas Monroe, 1932. My ancestors. And taped beside each name was a single piece of paper, a death certificate. Every one of them listed the cause of death as suicide, except the last one, my mother's. Cause of death, unconfirmed. A sound echoed behind me, a soft scrape, like someone dragging their hand along the dirt. I spun around, flashlight shaking, but the tunnel was empty. Then I noticed something else, a carving on the far wall, written in a shaky, desperate hand, "We feed the hollow." My stomach dropped. I didn't know what it meant, but every instinct told me to run. I scrambled back through the tunnel, boards splintering as I pushed into the cellar. I slammed the door shut and bolted it. My heart wouldn't slow down. I poured another glass of whiskey, my hands trembling so badly most of it spilled. Then I heard my father's voice, not a memory. His voice, whispering from the kitchen, "Now you know, boy." I dropped the glass. It shattered at my feet. The air in the house turned thick, electric. Every light flickered. The floorboards groaned like something massive was moving beneath them. Then I heard my mother's voice again, faint, from below. "Eli, please, free me." I ran to the cellar door, keys shaking in my hand, and threw it open. The tunnel was gone. The wall had been rebuilt, solid, unbroken wood. I pounded on it until my knuckles bled, screaming her name. But the house just groaned in reply. That's when I saw the photo lying on the floor by the door, one I hadn't seen before. It was my father standing in front of that same wall, and next to him, nailed upright against it, was my mother, alive, her mouth open in a silent scream. I stumbled backward, choking on air, my vision blurred. That was the truth my father hid. He hadn't buried my mother. He'd offered her, to the hollow, whatever that was. I don't remember how I made it upstairs, but by dawn, I was outside in my truck, hands gripping the wheel so tight they ached. I drove until the house vanished behind the trees. It's been 3 weeks since I left Coldwater Hollow. I'm staying in a motel off Route 11, and every night I dream of that house. Sometimes I see my mother. Sometimes I see my father, smiling with that same calm expression he wore at her funeral. But last night was different. Last night, I woke up with dirt under my fingernails, and when I checked the motel bathroom mirror, there was something etched faintly into the glass, words written in my father's handwriting. "It's your turn, Eli. Feed the hollow." I don't know what it means, not fully, but I can feel it. Something's calling me back. When I close my eyes, I hear the tapping again, faint but steady. It's coming from under the floor, and I think it's waiting for me.
Now that you know what happened there, let me tell you about another chilling encounter.
I always thought my mother's death was an accident. That's what everyone said anyway. A faulty gas line, a spark in the kitchen. She was gone before anyone could save her. I was 12 then. My father never talked about it, and by the time I turned 18, he'd moved us out of that house and never looked back. But grief is strange. It fades, reshapes, and one day comes back in a form you can't ignore. For me, it came back as a phone call. "Mr. Anderson," said the attorney's voice, "your father's estate includes the original property in Vermont. The house has reverted to your name. You're the last living heir." The words made my stomach turn. That house was supposed to be gone. I'd seen it burn, but apparently not all of it had. The drive north felt endless. Vermont's roads wound through thick forests, every turn hidden by fog. The house stood alone on a hill. 3 stories of blackened timber, half-collapsed roof, and boarded windows. It shouldn't have been standing at a. I parked in the overgrown driveway, stepping out into the wet air. The smell hit me first, that strange mix of ash, pine, and something older, something sour. Inside, everything was covered in soot, the wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing scorched wood beneath. The furniture was charred but untouched, as if frozen in time. On the kitchen table sat a single object untouched by fire, a silver locket. It was my mother's. When I opened it, there was a photo of me as a boy on one side, and a tiny scrap of parchment on the other, stained dark red, with 3 words written in delicate cursive. "He isn't your father." I don't remember how long I stood there. My pulse roared in my ears. When I was little, my mother always kept that attic locked. I used to hear noises up there at night, soft footsteps, whispering, sometimes even laughter. She'd tell me it was just the wind, but the look in her eyes said otherwise. The padlock was still on the door, melted from the heat, but weak enough to break with a crowbar. When I pushed it open, a rush of stale air hit me. Inside, the attic was untouched. No soot, no fire damage, just dust. And something else. A cradle. I froze. The cradle was old, antique wood, painted white, though the paint had yellowed with age. A thin layer of dust coated it, except for one spot in the center, like something had rested there recently. Beside it stood a rocking chair, and on the floor, a set of deep scratches, long, straight, and parallel. Claw marks. My flashlight flickered, and I thought I saw movement in the corner. A figure, small and hunched, just for a second. But when I turned, nothing was there. Then I noticed the wall behind the cradle. Someone had drawn on it in faded chalk. Words, childish, looping. "Don't let him find me." I took a step back. The floorboards groaned beneath my boots. And then I heard it, a sound so faint I almost thought I imagined it. A baby's cry, coming from the cradle. I ran, down the stairs, out the front door, gasping in the cold air like I'd been drowning. I sat in my car for a long time, shaking, telling myself it wasn't real. But when I looked back at the house, the attic window was glowing faintly, like a candle had just been lit. That night, I stayed at a cheap motel a few miles away. I didn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about what my mother's note said. He isn't your father. Who then? The next morning, I went to the county records office in town. The clerk, a gray-haired woman with tired eyes, pulled up my mother's file. She frowned as she scrolled through the records. "That's strange," she said. "There's a sealed birth certificate attached to your name. I can't access it." "Who sealed it?" She hesitated. "Your father, in 1993, but it wasn't notarized by a county official. Just him." My stomach twisted. I drove straight back to the house. By afternoon, the fog had thickened. I could barely see the front porch. But when I walked in, I knew I wasn't alone. Footprints, small ones, marked the soot on the floor. Bare feet, leading toward the attic stairs. Every rational thought told me to leave, but something deeper, something twisted and aching inside me, pushed me forward. When I reached the attic door, I heard it again. That faint, broken sound. A baby crying. I stepped inside. The cradle was moving, gently. The air was freezing, my breath visible. I forced myself closer, heart hammering, flashlight trembling. When I looked inside, my blood went cold. A small bundle lay there, wrapped in burnt cloth. Inside, I could see the outline of, but it wasn't a baby. It was a doll, carved from wood, covered in dried blood. Its mouth was open in a silent scream, and underneath it, carved into the cradle, were words etched deep into the wood. "One must burn, one must live." A sudden crash behind me made me whirl around. The attic door slammed shut. The light flickered and died. I was trapped in total darkness. Then I heard footsteps, slow, dragging, too heavy to belong to a child. Ethan, my father's voice. "Son, why did you come back?" My throat went dry. "You're dead." Some deaths don't end with death. The air around me thickened, pressing against my chest. I could smell him, the same cologne he always wore, the faint scent of tobacco. "You were never supposed to find this place," he said. "Your mother broke the rule." I stumbled backward, hands searching for the door. "What rule?" He stepped into the dim light from the window, his face pale, eyes sunken. He looked just as he had before he died. "Only wrong. In our bloodline," he whispered, "one child lives, the other burns. That's the way it's always been. Twins born under one breath. One for the world above, one for the world below." I shook my head, unable to breathe. "I don't have a twin." His mouth twitched into something like a smile. "You did." The attic walls began to creak, the air vibrating with low rhythmic noise, almost like breathing. The floor beneath the cradle darkened, the wood soaking up something thick and red. And then, from the shadows, something crawled out. It was small, barely 4 feet tall, skin gray and thin as paper, hair in clumps, eyes wide and black, reflecting the faint light like glass. It looked almost human. Almost. Its voice came out cracked, rasping. "Brother." My knees buckled. "No," I whispered. "That's not possible." Father smiled. "We couldn't let both live. Your mother tried to hide him. She failed. The hollow took her instead." The thing crawled closer. "So cold down there," it said, reaching out a bony hand. "You forgot me." I stumbled backward, slamming into the wall. Father's figure began to fade into the dark, his voice echoing one last time. "Finish it, Ethan. One must burn." The attic filled with a low hum, like hundreds of voices whispering in unison. The cradle burst into flames. I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, collapsing in the grass. The fire spread fast, climbing through the attic window. The smoke turned the sky black. I watched the house burn, again. But this time I heard the screaming. two voices tangled together, my mother's and mine. It's been months since that night. The house is gone. They said the foundation collapsed into some kind of sinkhole after the fire, that nothing could be recovered. But sometimes, late at night, I hear crying in my apartment, a baby's cry, and sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I swear I see someone standing behind me. The same face, the same eyes, but I know what it means now. My mother didn't save me, she saved him.
If you like this story, then you should listen to this chilling story.
I grew up thinking my grandfather was a good man. He was a tall, quiet farmer in western Pennsylvania who always smelled of tobacco and apples. He taught me to drive a tractor before I could drive a car. He gave me my first pocket knife and told me stories about how our family built this land with our own hands. But he never talked about 1957. No one did. I only found out by accident, years later, after his funeral. I was 27 when my father called me about the old property. The county wants to buy the orchard, he said. We're the last of the Harrows. Someone's got to clear out Granddad's place. I didn't want to. Not really. That house had always felt heavy. But Dad had heart trouble and couldn't do it himself. So I drove up one gray October morning, past the dead cornfields, to the house at the edge of the orchard. It hadn't changed much. Peeling white paint, sagging porch, the wind carrying the faint smell of rotting apples. Inside, it was like time had stopped. Granddad's boots still sat by the door. His chair still faced the window. His old radio sat on the counter, silent. And in the kitchen drawer, under a stack of yellowed newspapers, I found it. A photograph, black and white, taken at night. My grandfather, standing in the orchard with a shovel. At his feet lay a man's body. I stared at it so long, my hands went numb. The man on the ground wore a suit. His eyes were open. His face was twisted in terror. On the back of the photo, written in a shaky hand, "Never speak his name." I shoved the photo back in the drawer and slammed it shut. But the house had already changed. The air felt heavier, like something had been listening. That night, I slept in my grandfather's old room. The orchard outside was black, the trees bent under the wind. Around midnight, a soft knock woke me. I sat up. Another knock. From the window. I pulled the curtain back, heart hammering. A man stood in the orchard. Pale face, dark eyes, suit torn and dirty. He raised a hand, slowly, and pointed at me. Then his mouth opened, but no sound came out. Just a thin mist that drifted toward the house. I stumbled back. The glass was freezing under my fingertips. My breath fogged. When I blinked, he was gone. But the apple trees were swaying violently, though the wind had died. I left at dawn, drove into town, sat in the library with a black coffee until my hands stopped shaking. Then I started searching old newspapers. It didn't take long. In 1957, I closed the paper. I finally understood. Granddad hadn't saved the orchard by hard work. He'd saved it by murder. And now the dead man knew my name. When I got back to the house that evening, my father was there. He shouldn't have been. The drive was too hard on him. But there he stood on the porch, pale and trembling. "You found it," he said quietly. "What?" "The photo." I hesitated. "Dad, what really happened?" He looked past me, toward the orchard. "Your grandfather made a deal. But deals don't stay buried." The wind shifted. The smell of apples grew stronger, sickly sweet, like fruit left too long in the sun. I heard something moving in the trees. Slow footsteps. That night, Dad and I sat in the kitchen, the photo between us. He told me everything. Granddad caught Redfern out here alone, beat him with a shovel, buried him under the oldest tree in the orchard. But something went wrong. By the next harvest, animals started dying. Crows would gather in the 100. Workers quit after seeing someone moving among the trees at night. Granddad stopped sleeping, stopped smiling. Then, one autumn, he took me out to the orchard, handed me an apple, and said, "Never dig under the roots." He died 2 weeks later. A sudden knock on the door made us both jump. 3 slow knocks. I went to the window. The same man stood at the edge of the orchard, closer now. I could see his face clearly, the caved-in skull, the hollow eyes. The torn suit still flecked with dirt. His mouth opened again, and this time a sound came out, a wet, rasping whisper. "Return what's mine." Then the front door swung open by itself. The smell of earth poured in. Dad clutched his chest, gasping. "He's here," he said. "He's never going to stop." The lights flickered, the walls groaned. From outside, the apple tree. I grabbed Dad and dragged him toward the back door. But when we stepped outside, the orchard had changed. The trees formed a corridor leading to the oldest tree. At its base, the soil was fresh. A shovel lay waiting. Dad fell to his knees. "He wants us to finish it," he gasped. "To bring him up." "No," I whispered. "We're not digging anything." But the ground began to heave. Dirt cracked and shifted. Something pale pushed through the soil. A hand, skeletal and covered in roots. Dad screamed. I dropped to the ground, clawing at the soil with my bare hands, not even sure why. Maybe to bury it deeper, maybe to stop it. But the hand grabbed my wrist, cold, strong, pulling me down. The last thing I remember is Dad shouting my name, the earth swallowing my arm to the elbow. A face pushing through the dirt, Redfern's face, lips moving, whispering words I couldn't hear. Then blackness. I woke up at dawn, lying at the base of the tree. The orchard was still. My clothes were torn and caked with soil. Dad was gone. There was no sign of Redfern, no sign of the hand, only a shallow pit where the roots had been. Inside it lay the photograph. But now, the photo showed 3 people, my grandfather, Redfern, and me. I was holding the shovel. I left the orchard that day and never went back. The county bought the land. They say they're turning it into a park. But sometimes, when I drive past on the highway, I see a man standing among the apple trees. He raises a hand and points at me.
If you like this story, then you should listen to this chilling story.
I inherited my grandfather's cabin in Montana last year, a 1-room log house on a patch of land no one had lived on for decades. He never talked about it when he was alive. My father didn't either. I didn't even know it existed until the lawyer called. "Property passed through the male line," the man said. "Your grandfather, then your father, now you." I remember laughing. Weird tradition. The lawyer didn't laugh back. When I got there, the air was so still it felt like time had stopped. The cabin sat deep in the woods, 3 miles from the nearest dirt road. It was smaller than I expected. A single door, no visible windows except one near the roof. There were scratch marks around the frame, like someone had clawed at it from the inside. The trees grew close together here, too close. Their roots were exposed, twisting around each other like veins. The first night, I didn't sleep. I heard something moving outside, slow footsteps circling the cabin, stopping just short of the porch. When I finally built the courage to peek through the curtain, there was no one there. Just the forest, and the faint outline of what looked like a wooden cross planted deep among the pines. The next morning, I found my grandfather's old journal, hidden under a loose floorboard. Most of it was faded, but one entry stood out, written in jagged handwriting. "The girl still cries beneath the roots. I can't drown her voice, no matter how deep I dig. I told the sheriff she ran away. He believed me, but she doesn't." I dropped the book. My hands were shaking. I didn't know what to believe. My grandfather, Joseph Callahan, was respected in town, a war veteran, church deacon, family man. The idea that he'd hurt someone was unthinkable. But the more I read, the worse it got. He mentioned a name several times, Lydia. No last name, just Lydia. And always the same line after it, she knows. That night, it started again, the footsteps. But this time, they didn't stop at the porch. Something knocked on the door, 3 times, slow, deliberate. I froze in the chair, gripping the shotgun I'd found under the bed. Then a voice came through the wood. "Let me in, Joe." It was a woman's voice, soft, wet, like she was speaking through water. My throat went dry. "Who's there? Don't you remember me?" The air turned cold, every breath visible. I backed away from the door, and then I heard it, faint but clear. The sound of a child crying, coming from beneath the floor. The next morning, I drove into town. The local sheriff was older than the hills, probably in his 70s. When I told him my name, his face changed. "Callahan?" he said quietly. "Yeah, I'm Joseph's grandson." He rubbed his jaw. "You shouldn't have gone back there." "Why?" He hesitated, then leaned in. "Because that cabin's not yours. It's hers." He told me the story. In 1951, a girl named Lydia Byrne went missing from the nearby town. 17 years old, last seen near the Callahan property. They searched for weeks. Nothing. Then one night, Joseph showed up at the sheriff's office drunk and trembling, muttering that the forest took her. They searched his land again. Still nothing. But the sheriff remembered something, the dirt under Joseph's nails. He couldn't prove anything, though. The case went cold. Joseph sold the main farm and moved into that cabin for the rest of his life, alone. I went back to the cabin that evening. I don't know why. Curiosity, guilt, maybe something else. But when I opened the door, I froze. The journal was on the table, open to a page I hadn't left it on. "If you find this, dig where the pine roots cross. She'll never rest until she sees your face." The ink was fresh, like someone had written it that day. I took a lantern and went outside. The forest was silent. No wind, no wind. Just the sound of my boots crunching the frost. I found the spot easily. 2 massive pine trees, growing so close their roots had tangled together. I dug. The soil was soft, damp. The deeper I went, the colder it got. And then my shovel hit wood. A box. She tilted her head. "You carry his name. That's enough." Then the ground beneath the pines began to move. Roots snapped and twisted, wrapping around the open box. The soil swallowed it whole, sealing it shut again. "Now you know," she said, and she vanished. I left the next morning. I didn't pack, didn't look back. I just drove until the road disappeared into sunlight and the woods were gone. A week later, I got a call from the sheriff. "The cabin's gone," he said. "We sent a team out there. Whole thing burned down last night. No lightning, no power lines, just ash." I didn't.
If you like this story, then you should listen to this chilling story.
They say every family has secrets. I just never thought mine would be buried beneath floorboards. When my father died last year, I inherited the house on Grayson Hill, a decaying Victorian that had been in our family for 4 generations. It stood at the edge of a dying town in rural Virginia, surrounded by fog and pine trees that never seemed to lose their color. I hadn't been there since I was 9. Back then, the house was alive, full of noise, laughter, and the faint smell of my mother's rose perfume. She died when I was 10. My father never talked about it, never explained, just packed her things away and told me to forget. But I couldn't forget. Not the whispers in the walls, not the sound of footsteps outside my room when everyone was asleep, not the way my father used to lock the basement door every night and pocket the key. Now, Decades later, that same key sat heavy in my hand, and I was finally going to use it. The first thing I noticed when I stepped inside was the silence. It wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating. The air smelled like dust and something faintly metallic, like rusted iron. The wallpaper had peeled, the furniture covered in white sheets, and the chandelier above the staircase hung crooked. Everything looked frozen in time. I spent the first night in my old bedroom upstairs. The air was cold, and I could hear faint scratching sounds in the walls. Probably mice, I told myself. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I started sorting through the house. My father had kept everything: boxes of letters, newspaper clippings, and journals. He'd always been secretive, but what I found in the study made my stomach tighten. A box marked family records. Inside were birth certificates, death certificates, and one document that didn't belong: a hospital form dated March 13th, 1973, the year I was born. The mother's name was blank. Under father, it read, Henry Doyle, my grandfather, not my father. I sat there for a long time, staring at that name. My father had always told me he was an only child, that my grandparents died before I was born. But if Henry Doyle was my father, then who was the man who raised me? I went looking for answers the only place they could still be: the basement. The door was stiff but unlocked. I clicked on my flashlight and descended the creaking stairs. The air grew colder with each step, and a damp, earthy smell filled my lungs. The basement was cluttered: jars of nails, boxes of tools, and stacks of old furniture. But in the far corner, behind a shelf of canned fruit, I saw something strange. A wooden door, half-sized. It was built into the stone wall, almost like it was meant to be hidden. The handle was cold when I touched it. The hinges groaned as I pulled it open. Behind it was a narrow staircase descending into the dark. I should have walked away. Every instinct told me to, but something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe blood, pushed me forward. The stairs led to a small room, barely tall enough to stand upright. My flashlight beam caught something on the wall. Writing, carved into the concrete in shaky letters. "Forgive me, Henry." I turned, and that's when I saw the table. It wasn't furniture. It was an altar. Candles had melted into puddles, long since hardened. In the center sat a small metal box. When I opened it, I found a bundle of letters, tied together with black string. The first was addressed to my son, Michael. That was my father's name. The letter was dated 1973. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. "My boy, if you are reading this, I have failed. The woman could not be saved. I told her it was necessary. The blood must stay pure. The curse must remain contained. You will understand one day. Our family cannot let it spread again." My stomach twisted. I flipped to the next one. "She screamed your name, Michael. Said you were hers. But she was lying. She belonged to the other. I buried her under the house. Do not dig there. Ever." I dropped the letters. My head spun. The other, the curse, buried under the house. The air grew colder. I heard something move behind me. A soft shuffle of bare feet on stone. When I turned, there was nothing. Only the writing on the wall, faintly glowing in the flashlight beam. Then I heard a whisper. Close. Right beside my ear. "Michael!" I froze. That was my mother's voice. I ran up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped the key twice before locking it. I spent the next hour sitting in the kitchen, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. But the smell of dirt lingered, faint and cold, as if the basement door was breathing. That night, I dreamed of her. My mother, standing in the basement, her dress soaked in mud, her face pale, eyes black as oil. She reached out to me and whispered, "He lied." When I woke up, my sheets were damp, and there was dirt under my fingernails. The next day, I drove to the county archives. I needed to know who my mother really was. It took hours, but I found her name on an old death record. Anna Doyle, age 24. Cause of death, undetermined. She died the same night I was born. The clerk, an old woman with kind eyes, frowned when she saw the name. The Doyles, that old family? Strange people, those ones. The father, Henry, always talked about bloodlines and curses. They said he kept his daughter locked away. Poor girl vanished before she had that baby. She smiled nervously. "You wouldn't happen to be related, would you?" I didn't answer. When I got back to the house, the front door was open. I knew I'd locked it. Inside, the floor was covered in muddy footprints, small, bare, leading toward the basement. The key was still in the lock, and the door was open. I gripped my flashlight and stepped inside. The hidden door below was wide open now. The air was freezing, each breath forming a mist. The letters were gone, but the wall was wet. I shone my light across it, and my heart stopped. New words had been scratched into the stone. "You are the other." The ground beneath my feet groaned. I stumbled backward as the floor gave way, sending me crashing into a hollow space beneath the foundation. When the dust settled, I saw it. A small wooden coffin, half buried in dirt. The lid was cracked open, just enough for me to see what was inside. Bones, a woman's bones, and something else, a locket. When I picked it up, I recognized the photo inside instantly. My father, holding a baby, but it wasn't me. There were two, twins. I crawled out of that hole, shaking, the locket still in my hand. My mind was spinning. My grandfather had killed my mother. My father had known. And somewhere, at some point, there had been another. The whisper returned, stronger now, coming from the walls themselves. "Why did you leave me down here?" I dropped the flashlight. The darkness swallowed me whole. Something cold brushed my arm, and I screamed. A shape moved in front of me, pale, thin, with hair hanging in wet strands. Her voice was my own. "Two of us were born," she said softly. "Only one was kept." I stumbled back toward the stairs. "You're not real." Her head tilted. He made sure of that. Then she smiled, her teeth too sharp, too wrong. But blood remembers. I don't remember how I got out. I woke up on the front lawn, the morning sun burning through the fog. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. When I finally went back inside, the basement door was gone. The wall where it had been was solid, seamless stone. The letters, the altar, everything vanished. Only the locket remained, clutched tight in my hand. I left that day, sold the property, burned the records, and swore never to return. But sometimes, late at night, I hear scratching under my floorboards. And when I dream, I see her, the other me, crawling out from the dirt, whispering through the dark, "It's your turn to sleep."